I got an email this afternoon from Howie Bagelman. Howie Bagelman's the CEO of the Ohio Jewish Communities. He works in Columbus, working with Republicans and Democrats, lobbying for Jewish values in the State House. What he wrote about was a frustrating experience in the airport where he had 2 flights canceled on the same day. And so you're not the only one. 2 flights canceled on the same day, and the 3rd flight was delayed for hours. And so I know many of us have been in those situations, and it seems like nothing can get us to our highest level of anger than having travel plans, or maybe you would say equally, like, I know, as we have a pilot here, it wasn't the pilot's fault. And it wasn't Delta. I don't know that, but I'm going to say it here that it wasn't Delta. Nothing could be as frustrating as being stuck somewhere or having your computer not work the way you want it to work, or the phone. And so he was trying to find a place to go sit and do the work that he was missing, and there was somebody who saw him, and they invited him into the executive lounge. And it made his day. I share this because this week's Torah portion in many ways reminds us that sometimes solutions to big problems are small acts. The simple act of inviting somebody to be your guest into an executive lounge, or as is the case in our Torah portion, it's the story of the daughters of Zelophehad. We come to this portion, there's all this tragedy happening. In fact, the first half of the portion is all about men doing terrible things. We have too many kids here, we can't say what they were doing. But you can imagine men doing really, really terrible, terrible things, particularly to women. And the Torah portion deals, for the most part, with that huge problem. And then at the end, for some reason, this very small issue comes up, seemingly, that these daughters come to Moses and they say, all the men in our family aren't alive anymore, and nobody's going to inherit our land. And we would like to be able to inherit our land, which at the time was not allowed. And God steps in, overruling Moses, and says, you can inherit this land as women. But by comparison to the terrible things that were going on, this one minor property issue comes up, and it's solved quite simply. There's a story in the Talmud told about King David, that when King David was going to build the temple, that first, of course, I know we have some builders in the room too, first you have to dig the foundation. So David went to dig the foundation, and water flooded the whole city of Jerusalem. Nobody was going to be able to live, and in fact, the story says everybody would have died because the water, like Noah's flood, would have kept rising. The story says David wrote God's name on this little stone and threw it into the middle of the hole, and the water started to recede. But the story continues. It says that from that point on, every time somebody treats somebody else poorly, the water starts to rise again. But every time somebody does a small kind deed for someone, the water goes down again. And so the world, in other words, the world can only exist if these small things that we do for other people are happening all the time. I'll close with one last story, which is one that a friend passed along to me, that reminds us perhaps exactly how far these seemingly small deeds can reach. It's about a man in Australia who happened to live in a place where from his living room he would look out, and there was a big a mountain, a big cliff. It was a beautiful view. And he noticed that it was also a place that, again with kids in the room, we'll keep it PG, but it was a place that when people were depressed, they would try to go. And so he would sit, instead of going and playing cards with his friends sometimes, and instead of going out with his wife, he would sit in his living room and have a cup of coffee and look out his window and see if anybody would go out to the edge of the cliff. And if they did, he would go out to meet them, and he would sit down, and he would simply ask them how they're doing and start to have a conversation. The Australian government found out that he had been doing this, and they found that he had had 168 conversations and saved 168 lives. And they gave him the highest medal of honor that they would give normally to a military hero, because they said he saved as many lives as somebody would if they were fighting in battle. But all it was walking out and having a small conversation with somebody at the right time in a bad moment. But it had life-saving impact. Worlds, in fact, we would say, were saved because of a small act of kindness. And so, for us, even when the world feels like it's flooding with challenges or things are too big for us to handle, sometimes, perhaps more times than not, our job is to find a way to take the big problems and offer a small solution. But when those add up, the waters recede, and we get to gather in our temple and see the center of our world thrive once again. Shabbat Shalom.